Ding. All right, in recording in progress, we have Mary Beth here also to help us. So we will get started. I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Bass, my favorite people in this in this community. So Dr. Tanya Bass is the founder of the North Carolina Sexual Health Conference and president/CEO of Optics to Action, a newly established organization specializing in special development for human service professionals. She also serves as the leader instructor for human sexuality at her alma mater and historically Black College and University, HBCU, North Carolina Central University, in the Department of Public Health Education. Her commitment to educating the next generation of sexuality and public health educators is evident in her work as an adjunct instructor for several years. Dr. Bass completed her doctoral studies at Weiner University and holds certifications as a certified sexuality educator with the American Association of Sexuality Education, excuse me, American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, as well as Certified Health Education Specialist through the National Commission of Health Education Credentialing. She also serves as the Vice President of Membership of ASEC and is a member of the editorial board for the American Journal of Sexuality Education. Without further ado, Dr. Tanya Bass, welcome. We're so excited to learn from you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. I was saying, I see friends in here. It's kind of cool to see friends in this space that I haven't seen in a while, or some I just saw last month. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you all for being here. Oh, I see more friends. Hey, Liz. Hey, Susan. Okay, I got to stop. I can just keep calling names out, but like, definitely excited. It's good to have people on the screen, so it's not like I'm just talking to myself. So I'm just go ahead and jump in. I'm excited to be with you on today, talking about navigating the path together. I think Judy laid a great foundation for this talk and probably the other breakout rooms too, in thinking about the importance of our work together as educators and working with parents, thriving against adversity in sex ed, and just thinking about political climate and nature and all the things that are going on. We need more vocal parents in support of what we are doing, but we also need parents to continue learning. We all probably know and believe that sexuality education is a lifespan developmental process, and so in order for parents to be better educators and have our backs, they kind of need a little more education as well. And it's not easy. It's not easy even when we get trained to do this. So I'm going to see if this technology is working and keep moving on. Okay, great. So why are we here? I'm hoping that our short time together we'll be able to explore a little bit about how sexuality educators and parents can really work together to address some of the challenges and controversies surrounding education. What are those challenges? And to explore ways to create a positive learning environment that, allows people, our kiddos and our students and our learners to learn, but also understand and address the parental concerns and fears that folks may actually have. And then hopefully I'll leave you with a few strategies for constructive dialogue while keeping your boundaries. Because I think Judy also mentioned that. I was like, well, Judy just did the talk. I don't even need to be here, but talking about maintaining our professional boundaries. And believe it or not, a lot of folks aren't in our profession, in our work, don't see eye to eye as it relates to boundaries. You have some people here and some people there. We'll get to that on the slide because I'm ready to already jump into that. But this is what we hope to accomplish on today. So just a little bit about me, and I know Victoria read my bio. Just want to give you a snapshot. So I'm working with organizations, and I'm doing trainings, and I'm working in North Carolina specific. So I also need to pause for the cause and offer up and take a note from some colleagues last night who was shared who they were and where they were. So I want to offer that my geographic location is in Holly Springs, North Carolina. I'm originally from Brooklyn, so big ups to Brooklyn. And but I've been in North Carolina for years. I'm living here and actually was raised in the same regional territory of the Tuscarora land. And I identify as a Black, African American, fat, amazing, um, cis female, and I am coming to you literally from my home with a fake blue screen in North Carolina, and my coworker is down here on the floor. At in probably 20 minutes, you might hear them making noise because my partner will be coming home, but yeah, that's just who I am. And also using she, her pronouns. And I have had the pleasure, getting back to why I wanted to pause for that, of working with K-12 educators, health educators, public health educators who work in health departments, and working with parents. And since 2009, had started doing a lot of parent work with an old, well, we don't want to get into evidence-based stuff, but it was an evidence-based curriculum. We'll talk a little bit about it more, but working with parents in North Carolina, specifically in the county that I live in, and a few counties surrounding where I am. But what I wanted to say is that we all come from this from different perspectives. Working at NCCU, which is my alma mater, working at the University of Michigan, University of Minnesota in their certificate program. You know, there's a lot that we all have to learn together to do this work effectively. So it wouldn't be fair to make assumptions about each other as professionals. And the same would be true for parents. Not all parents are the same. Not all of us as professionals are the same. You meet one parent, you meet one parent, you meet one of your professionals, you might jive together, but you meet a professional. So hoping you understand that. And that's my positionality as I come into this. So let's jump right in. And let's use the chat if we're able. Victoria, I think we can, so I'm saying do that. But use the chat to answer this question. Um, Let me ask you this. What are some of the challenges? Like, what are the challenges? So I kind of categorize challenges that we might face and approach and navigate as sexual health professionals as it relates to sexuality as a whole as factual versus moral, intentional versus unintentional, and explicitly versus implicitly when we think about the learnings. So if you could use the chat, like what comes up to your mind when you think about challenges you face doing your work, whether it's with parents, with policies, etc. Drop them in the chat. Let's just try to get a little bit of engagement here, and I'll try to read some of them. What are those challenges? Well, yeah, there's my coworker. Hopefully you didn't. All right, so one of the challenges that people are offering, absolutely, individual, religious, and moral beliefs. Fears that talking to kids about sex will definitely make them have sex or want to have sex, absolutely. Parents' misconceptions that education leads to sexual behavior, absolutely. Fellow colleagues' inability to support your work. People not believing that people with developmental disabilities are sexual, absolutely. Burnout, Victoria, you know it because it happens. Not enough sex educators in the area, which could lead to burnout and exhaustion for sure. Misinformation, let's see what that says. Parents thinking that sex education is grooming, exactly like what Judy offered up. Misinformation and disinformation about what we're actually teaching. Yeah, there's a meme that's like, as a sex educator, somebody made like what I do versus what people think I do, and it's always hard. Sometimes I just say I'm a health educator. It's fine. I talk about sexual health, so it's not really untrue. And how can we be askable adults for kids when we are mandated to report to a very racist child protective system? I guess that's a question for later, but maybe that's a challenge that you're dealing with too. Beliefs that parents should be talking to the kids, ooh, and no one else. That just doesn't make sense, right? They don't teach just math. Like if we relied on parents for just math, I don't know. I wouldn't do well if I was a parent because I suck at math. I can spend money, but I'm not really good at math. So let's let some professionals help us out with that when we can. And then I'll just jump in and add a last, let's see, the last one. Let's see. Sorry, my coworker is really going off. Parents are uncomfortable with sexuality themselves. Absolutely. That is definitely something that we see. All right, so let's talk about it a little bit. So when I think about that, all of these things are true. And if I were to give you examples for factual versus moral, right? So a lot of our work, honestly, if you think about what we are instructing and teaching, it's literally based on facts. I don't even want to say science because that takes us into another whole social political dynamic, but it is. It's kind of like the facts, the science. This is what it is. But a lot of times we don't have that support of the science and the facts. So my example for that would be, in many instances, if we even think about reproductive anatomy, we tend to only show binary anatomy. We don't talk about intersex as a gender identity or biological sex marker. We don't talk about the clitoris because it's about pleasure. So it's kind of like, here's the fact the clitoris exists, but the versus the moral compass is that it's about pleasure and we shouldn't even be talking about it. I don't know what's wrong with you, dude. And there's that. And then maybe intentional versus unintentional. So a lot of times we talk, you hear people talk about the birds and the bees. So we're gonna have this conversation or many conversations, like not just a talk about sexuality, but then people always kind of counter that. Some people and parents counter that with the birds and the bees. Like, what is that? And I know that's an ideology, but it's not the appropriate way often to have these conversations about sex and sexuality. But it becomes cyclical and generational because that's the information and the way it's actually been passed down. And then explicitly versus implicitly. So think about what the kiddos are seeing and even what we are seeing on social media, in movies, in music. Some things, whether accurate or inaccurate, we learn through watching shows, through listening to music, and what we think is actually going on with other people. So, sex education can be challenging and controversial because of everything you put in the chat and even categorizing them into these three categories on the screen. So, thank y'all for doing that. Uh-oh, let me get out of the chat here. So before we even can, talk about it, I think it's important to say, like, I have a lot to say about it, but what does the research say? I'm pretty sure you all have some opinions. We already know this, right? So let's go back to the science again. It's been proven, I think we all stand on it, that we know that sexuality education works. It does what it's supposed to do. It's been shown time and time again of the many benefits that people have, especially young people, when they receive comprehensive sexuality education. And it doesn't necessarily encourage sexual behavior in many instances because of
No,
the information.
we can switch it.
It might deter it or allow people to make informed decisions, because that's really what we want young folks and even adults to do, to make informed decisions. Secondly, if we think about what does the research say, we also know that what I'm going to talk about later in the program that I started originally training on with parents is parents matter. Parents do play a role. They're our first educators, all of us, and parents should be encouraged to discuss their views on sexuality education with the teachers, with the administrators, and even with school boards. We can't say, oh, the parents. We need the parents. We got to meet them where they are and help bring them along to maybe the science, right? To the fact and navigating their own moral beliefs. But we know that parents play a pivotal role and we need their support. We can't do it alone. They can't do it alone. Hope y'all see that as a fair thing. So this is what brings me to this. So all of us, if we think about whomever was our nurturing guardian, our parents, whatever environment we were in, we actually were exposed to some things. So when we think about sexuality, and I hope that you all think about sexuality in this way, that and let's use the chat again. Let's get some Y's and some N's, some yeses and some nos. Do you believe that sexuality includes physical, social, cultural, and psychological aspects of who we are? Let me go back to this chat. Let's see. Now we have some no's. We can talk about it offline. Slide into my DM, send me an email, because this is something that should be a universal and understood aspect of sexuality. All right, y'all. I'm bringing my coworker up because I don't know. They're just asking to be seen. So there's my coworker. But yes, yes, yes. And people are even talking about the circles of sexuality, for sure. Sexual development is something we're all going through. Again, lifespan experience. And like all the areas or dimensions of human development, it's not going to end. It starts at birth and it continues on. And it may show up in the way in which we absolutely spiritual, if you think about that, like some people even intertwine that with cultural, but absolutely. And it's something that continues on throughout life. Now, the kicker is when we think about behaviors, if we think about values, I'm going to try to close this chat. Thank you. Values, beliefs, all of that. Behaviors aren't necessarily isolated, but they're outcomes, or they're a part of the things that we are socialized to know. So, in the beginning, I won't say there was Adam and Eve. That was a joke. But in the beginning, you think about being socialized. We said parents are your first educators, right? So, whatever you were exposed to early in your childhood is going to have some type of influence, whether it be positive or negative, on who you are as a sexual being. What we see. Let me tell a quick story. When I was younger, and my sister never knew this, and I actually didn't tell her this until adulthood, because I didn't really think about it until I started diving more and reflecting in my own experiences. But my sister took me to see the movie Fame, the original Fame. And maybe some of you know Fame, but Leroy, whose grandmother, by the way, actually lived in my building in Brooklyn, but that's neither here nor there. But I remember when Leroy went to try out for the school, Debbie Allen, if you remember, was the dance teacher, and he did his audition. It was hot and steamy. I didn't even know what hot and steamy was, but I knew my body felt warm and I was liking what I was seeing on that screen. And in the movie, Debbie was like, whew, she had the fan. It was like an amazing sexual stimulating, like he drew you in on that performance. And I know that that impacted me throughout my adulthood. Like I'm sitting here now still like, Leroy, rest in peace. It was an amazing performance and beautiful body, like all the things. But I remember that. So when we talk about the cycle of socialization, which sometimes we talk about a lot around growth development and expanding our worldview, we can't discount sexual socialization. So that's the part around understanding the impact that what we see, hear, or are exposed to throughout our lives impacts our own behaviors, beliefs, values, etc. Y'all still with me? Put some yeses in the chat if you're with me. So continuing on, because this is why parents are so critical, as well as us as educators, regardless of the environment in which we're teaching. So in addition to having these experiences with our families, then we start having experiences at school or outside of the home, wherever that may be. So sexual socialization is the way young folks, and even as adults, because it doesn't stop, internalize those attitudes, those beliefs, those cultural symbols, those concepts that are all associated with sexuality. Things that we hear that are maybe microaggressions, right? Young folks are hearing that, but it helps develop our identity and it helps us interact with other people. And so this is why working with parents is an important concept, because we're going to impact the sexual socialization of the young people that we are actually around or teaching. a little bit more about this, I want to say that when we think about early adolescence or even early childhood, it is so critical because the family is playing that primary social unit that is going to shape what we see, think, and believe until, again, if you understand the cycle of socialization. If you don't, you can Google that. It's like a great diagram to really help you understand things that we learn. Sometimes we have to unlearn because they're not true, or we might internalize things about ourselves because that's what we saw how our family would treat people or say about different behaviors, etc. And so it starts at a very early age. Now, also, what does the research say around gaining knowledge? And so, again, socialization has a great impact. So here's what I want you to hone on this slide is that parental involvement in sex education is key, like I just said on the previous slide, in promoting positive sexual health for youngsters. So, when we think about this, we can also see that the data supports this, right? So, some of the national data offers up to us that about 80% of folks who identify as female and 70% of those who identify as male have discussed sexual and reproductive health with their parents before turning 18. And it consistently indicates that when they have good communication, even when there might be some misinformation or we got to take it day by day, which is also ultimately we want what we want parents to do, is that it has a positive association with their rates of adolescent sexual behavior. And this used risk behavior. I was going to take that out and paraphrase it a little bit more. But I wanted to give you what they offered up just to show that when parents have information or have conversations and they gain information even with their kiddos, that can have a drastic impact on their kids' sexual behavior, their values, their self-esteem, their self-identity, their sexual identity. So it's the not having the conversations that becomes problematic. And honestly, when I reflect on some of the conversations I had with my mom, some of them were so cliche, and I was, if you can probably tell, I've been talking a lot already. Like, I was a little sassy, if that's the word you want to use. I own that. I don't take it as a negative comment because I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, she would say, well, I can't even remember. Oh, she said one time she said something like, well, you better not come home pregnant. And I was like, well, technically, you didn't say don't have sex. So as long as I know how not to become like, ultimately the conversations weren't great at all. Like, thankfully they've improved as we've gotten older. Now I can't stop her from talking about what I do for work. But I just want to underscore that open communication is so important, and it's not a one-time conversation. I think all of us know this. It's continuous communication throughout the lifespan, even when your parent is 81 years old. So then it's kind of like, what do we know, about the young people? What are they saying? What are they offering? Like, what are some of their viewpoints? And so what some youth are actually saying is that in some of the research is offering up that they know that their attitudes are impacted by family, by their age, as it's going to change as they mature, their family background, and their own personal values. And so when we create inclusive environments that honor and respect that and have conversations to make space, oftentimes as educators, our job, and y'all can do a yes and a no in the chat again. Let me use this chat, is to provide information, right? And how many of you have had the opportunity in providing information to actually ask questions so that you can hear from your young people? Do you make space for that? Y or N in the chat? I'm seeing some head nods. So I'm seeing some yeses. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because you have to. You have to do that. And I know I worked in a place where we had to follow that 45 or 90 minute class curriculum guideline. And it meant that ultimately, if we had a module from a curriculum to present, there were no times, there was limited time to hear from the students, but we have to make that time. And that's what young people want from us as educators. And that's what they also want from their parents. So let's look at the next slide and see what they offered up. So some teens were saying, even if we're not having sex, we still have to make decisions about saying no. And so, we need everything. When we talk about comprehensive sex ed, I often feel like we don't have it well versed enough to say that that also includes abstinence. But it also reminds me to remind us is that as we're talking about abstinence, and it is something that people can choose, sometimes that choice is taken away. So we also have to think about it in the context of non-consensual behavior. So let's think about that too. The also kiddos or young people are saying, remember that you don't have to have all the answers. And I apologize. I want to offer up that this is what kids are saying about parents. But I also think it can relate to us too, because we don't have to have all the answers either. We're continuously learning new things as well. And this is my favorite part of this quote. And you don't need to share your own sexual experiences. A point that Judy was also, making. And I think parents probably have more liberty to extend those boundaries as it relates to sharing personal experiences than we do in our educational settings. But sometimes it's not even relevant. It might be nice to know, but let's give them what they need to know. And it may not be needing to know your personal experiences. Don't try to scare your teen into not having sex. It doesn't work, and it may leave them with the wrong information. And a lot of times with the scare tactics, I think if you tell the facts, and y'all can tell me yes or no in the chat. If you just share the facts, that's enough information. When you start layering facts with fear, you actually start treading into the space of misinformation, because you're gonna embellish and highlight things that are like the worst of all the things that could happen, which may not be the reality or even scientifically appropriate. So think about that. Also, kiddos are saying that having loving relationships and intimacy are an important part of adult life. And so they want to know how to have healthy relationships right now, so they'll know what it's going to be like as they continue to get older. Let me tell you, the skills that you can learn in navigating relationships, heck, even friendships in childhood are certainly valuable as we get into adulthood. The other part where I was talking about a continuous conversation versus the talk is young people say, keep talking. The more open you are, the more we know that we can get support, or it says you can support your teen, because they're talking about other teenagers or young people as well. Now, here's one. If your teen tells you they are interested in dating people of the same sex, you may not know how to respond to them, but there are resources that can help. What teens know is that having these conversations, or young people know what having these conversations with their parents are challenging. They know that there are resources out there because they're utilizing the resources to find language, to understand their own identities, to understand their own desires. And so they're saying, hey, look, there's information out there that's helping me. I want to talk to you about it. So let's ultimately work on these resources together. You're going to hear that a lot today. And then the biggest thing is listen, be open, and don't focus on the bad experiences. That's kind of like that fear I was talking about a little bit earlier as well. All right, so now here's the biggest piece, because some of us are degreed, some of us are certified, some of us have been doing this. My favorite comment from people, it's really not my favorite, it's a pet peeve. It's like, I've been doing this for 20 years. And I'm like, great. Because I think there's value in experience. It doesn't mean you've been doing it 20 years accurately. And if everybody who's been doing it 20 plus years was like perfect at it, in all the perfect ways, none of us would have a job. So what I want to offer up in the chat is to ask you, what do you think is key? Because, don't look at it. What do you think is key? My mouse is sensitive. I'm trying to get to the chat. What do you think is key for establishing credibility and trust with parents? All right, let's see. Availability, building relationships with them, transparency. Yeah, transparency. Yeah, like that was on the slide. Being authentic, open conversations. Ooh, I love this one. Empathy. Absolutely. Definitely being knowledgeable, but also in that under underscoring that sometimes you don't have all the answers. A willingness to just sit down and listen, compassion, being genuine, yes, thoughtful, non-judgmental, absolutely. Great, great, great. Thank y'all for engaging in the chat and pretend you did this earlier. But absolutely. So ways that we can build credibility and gain trust with parents is the first one I'll offer is transparency. We also have to be transparent not only about the curriculum and our teaching methods, but anything that we can share that what's going on in the school, in the society, politically. We also want to provide parents with an overview, if we can, of what's being covered, and ask them, what are some concerns that they may have. You might share what topics you're going to cover. You might share your teaching materials. If you're going to bring in any guest speakers, sharing any of that with them. Transparency just helps them understand the educational goals. And I think the other part around transparency and sharing the curriculum and what's being taught is to go back, and I think Judy also mentioned this, is how it aligns with the national health education standards, how it might align with the national, or I'm calling them national, yeah, sex education standards. Like, what are the best practices? What do kids need to know, and when do they need to know it to show that you are aligned with your school's curriculum, if you're working in schools, and what is appropriate nationally. But if you're working in a community, which I'm assuming all of us have a community that we're working with, you also can assess what's going on in your community locally to make sure you're teaching towards the culture and the need of what's happening in the community. And that transparency will gain you the trust and confidence of parents. The second thing I want to offer up and lift up is open communication, which kind of goes with the transparency. You need a way to really communicate with your parents. You can tell them, like, don't tell people to call me if you have any questions and concerns if you're really not going to answer or be available to answer questions and concerns. That's how you definitely lose credibility, because you said I could call and reach out, but yet you're not available. So do that. But the two-way communication actually demonstrates a willingness that you are concerned about their concerns. Is that fair? So hopefully you know that you can address parental needs and maybe even have meetings on occasion. With that, open communication goes into engage in the parental input, which is actively involving the parents in the decision-making process, helping inform. Here in North Carolina, some of the funded agencies that we have that are primarily community-based, I believe, but they all had to have a community advisory council. And you are encouraged to have a community advisory council or parental advisory council or committee, someplace where young people, because you got to keep them at the forefront, and parents are centered in the work that you're doing. So even though you have these standards and the curriculum that your school is expecting you to implement, what are still some of the information, needs, concerns that you can have a dialogue with how to address effectively with parents and with the students? Including parents also allows you to build that credibility, because maybe they didn't meet Tanya Bass at the school event, but they heard another parent say, you know what? That Tanya Bass is teaching over there at Northside High School. She really cares about what we're saying. You should talk to her, et cetera, et cetera. That builds your credibility. The next one would be respect parental values. We already talked about that, but think about where we come from, where we are, all the diverse values, all the beliefs that parents have, we have to ensure that what we're doing, and we were talking about it yesterday, using a lens of racial justice and social justice and equity in everything that we were doing. So look at your curriculum. Even if, I'm going back to the Ebbies, you can still make some modifications and adjustments that are considered green or yellow light adjustments in your curriculum to ensure that you're sensitive to cultural, religious, and moral perspectives. I think someone put in the chat earlier that culture or spirituality or religion definitely plays a part, and it doesn't our sexuality education and the work that we do isn't separated because we're doing under the auspices of health or something else like that. So we want to provide information on how it can even align with those values, right? And most of the time it's about safety and informed decision making. No one can knock that. They may try though. The other part is resource sharing. So we can offer resources and reading materials for parents for them to build their knowledge so that they're going to have our backs when we're talking about different topics. So you could provide a list of books, websites, organizations where they can get reliable information, and you too should stay abreast. So what I didn't put up here, but I'm going to underscore if I had a highlighter, underscore is your own professional development. Being here today, if you were with us yesterday, if you're going to be with some of us next week on another online conference, you need to also continuously invest in your own professional development. Now, that sounds very privileged. This is a free conference. So it's a great opportunity to be here. Take advantage of all the free things, all the things that you can do to improve your skills, your knowledge, sharpen your skills. Parents are more likely to trust us as educators if we also have a commitment to our own learning, because we're going to be able to effectively teach their kiddos and support them. So it's important that we improve our content and even our teaching methods. And then lastly is going to be the feedback mechanisms. Again, when I was working with some of the programs here in North Carolina, it was important to have feedback surveys, customer service, I think they call them customer satisfaction surveys. And even though we ideally wouldn't call our parents customers or our students, but we still need that feedback in order to get. So suggestion boxes, surveys are valuable tools to get information not only from the students, but for the parents as well. So let me get some reactions. I think can y'all do reactions? I think you can. Are there any reactions if I'm in the house? We got a few more slides to go. All right, so this is how you build your credibility, right? So now we're going to talk about collaboration and some examples. So we already know that when we collaborate, it's going to make things work better, especially when you collaborate with the community in which you're working in. It's going to be good for both the parents and the children. And let's just be honest. Well, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes with the kiddos I'm working with, even though I'm like feeling like I'm doing my best, everything, they're like, oh gosh, here we go. Because it's hard for them to talk about a topic that they don't get to talk about or there's shame around. And so you're navigating, there's going to be some who are overzealous and want to talk all day, will stay after class. And then there's some, it's still hard for them because of what they're navigating. But that's where you can utilize peer education. So peer education allows you, shout out Susan if you're there, Teen Pep, one of the peer education curricula, but like peer education allows trusted adults, the adults who are teaching the sex ed, to actually teach at a different level to other teens to teach their peers how to effectively have conversations, and then they may be able to receive the information. So you're still teaching, you're doing your thing, but you have these peer educators who are also your backup, just like the parents can become your backup. So peer education is one way to do that. Sometimes some of you, if you're working in school settings, sometimes you need to collaborate with another organization. Maybe it's the Boys and Girls Club or the Y or whatever, to create after school programming and opportunities to reinforce what was taught in the class as well. Again, in North Carolina, some of the funded programs that we have were in after school programs or out of school programming. And then that kind of goes along with the community-based effort. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the parenting education we did with faith communities in my county and what that actually looked like. So community-based efforts actually can work, and that's very important. Sorry, I'm looking for my notes here. All right. So here's the example I want to offer. I could not find, unless I took a picture of it, and actually I would have to run downstairs and get it. But back in, I want to say 2009, I started working at the state education department. And I know, like, I think Avis is up here and some other people might be familiar. Well, let's see who's familiar with it, because it was good when it was good, but you had to zhuzh it up. You know how Ebbies can be. So anybody familiar with the evidence-based curriculum from the CDC called Parents Matter? Yeses in the chat, no's in the chat. I'm gonna drink some water. I'm sorry, y'all. All right, I'm seeing some no's primarily. So I'll just explain it to you a little bit because this is going to explain it too. But Parents Matter was an evidence-based curricula um, created to have to support parents in I don't want to say empowering, because I think they already have the power to do it, but equipping them is the better word, to have conversations and build their communication skills when talking about sexual health. Or sometimes people will call them challenging topics, because it might be sexual health. Sometimes, depending on what we talked about, if we a little veered off curriculum, would also be about, drug and tobacco use, etc., etc. But it was a 6 session curricula where you would meet with parents weekly. Some people did it in a whole day, like maybe the day long thing, or just depending, how you can do serial groups. So basically it was a serial group curriculum that provided these strategies for parents. And I couldn't find it listed on the CDC because it needed to be updated terribly. However, I did find that they made updates to it, but they included and called it dating matters. And so it says Parents Matter for Dating Matters. And this is just a snapshot of the facilitator guide. But what I liked about Parents Matter is that it met parents where they were. And part of, the Ebby thing is that they had little video snippets, just like Making Proud Choices or some of the other curriculum y'all might be familiar with. And it allowed parents to share their fears, their hopes for their children, their hopes for, and let me pause. I know we're talking about parentals, or parents, but beyond parental engagement, like even guardians or trusted family members. And that's what Parents Matter did, to allow space for conversations around puberty, growth, and development. And it really worked. I personally use it in my own faith-based organization in North Carolina. I use it in probably over 20 organizations, working with the state and different community-based organizations who got funding to do that. And it was a time where you would have a component where parents would come in and do some learning, and then the young people would do some learning, or the young people would be given some other alternate education. But what I loved about Parents Matter, and y'all gotta love it too, I hope, is that it allowed, near the end, after some of the education, practice one-on-one sessions in a group setting. Like, people would spread out in the space and actually talk to their children. So if it was like two parents or whatever, Shayna, that was Making Proud Choices. It's just another evidence-based curriculum. I was just trying to get y'all to think of, like, evidence-based curricula tends to be, most of them are serial sessions that build on one another. And so that's what Parents Matter did. And there was a lot of repetition, but it was to reinforce the communication skills, to have them not get comfort from me as the educator only, but they got comfort from each other. All right, if y'all allow me, I'm looking at the time. Quick story. And I know they won't mind me telling this because they're adults now and they love what I do. Had Parents Matter at my church. My niece was there with her daughter, and in the room, the question came up about masturbation. Like, what do you do if your child's masturbating, or they ask you? And my niece is my age, so that's the whole other thing, just so you'll know, like, there's a large family. But as an adult with her child, she had no fear of talking to her daughter about masturbation. Now, she said this in an open group, and some people were like, of course, right? But it opened up a dialogue in my own faith organization, even about aspects of masturbation and what the scripture said, like around condemnation and shame, to say, like, this is a normal thing that could actually happen, and you should talk to your kiddos about that. And my pastor was there, and I'm fortunate because my pastor, she was a biology teacher, so I had like all the good things in this one setting. You know, it doesn't happen, it won't I'm sure it wouldn't happen in all settings in faith organizations, but I'm just giving you an example of when parents have the opportunity to lean and talk to one another about the challenges and the questions that they have with raising their kiddos. It can be very impactful. So moving on, giving this example, I already gave y'all this, but it's 6 weekly sessions on the following topics about increasing their awareness that their children face. So like one of the sessions is actually about a day in the life of a child, like what they see on TV, what they hear on the radio, how much influence they potentially could have around sex, relationships, or even substance use on an average day, walking to and from school or being at school, and having conversations about that. What it really honed on to is, like, let's say you're in a car. One of my college students reminded or told me when the song WAP came out by Meg The Stallion and Cardi B. And I told them, you know, they said that their mom was like, what do you know about this song? And I was like, your mom did a great thing. That was a teachable moment. Like, she seized the moment to say, well, and what do you know? And for her, she shared that it was the first time that her mom, because she's, you know, a sophomore in college, she said it was the first time that her mom saw her as a woman, you know, like in that moment of like, oh, you know, this isn't a kid anymore. And how great is that? So those kind of conversations could lead into more conversations. So Parents Matter really leaned into teachable moments, and it allowed parents to practice how to have these conversations with their young people. So, what we know about Parents Matter, and even with this new one, Dating Parents Matter for Datings Matter, is that parents who participate in this report feeling more competent and comfortable in having these conversations. And that's what really matters. If you have resources available for parents that help build their confidence and help build their competence, your work is going to be so much better because they're going to know where you're coming from, and they're going to understand it. And the fear, if you're being transparent and they're learning all at the same time, it's all going to make sense. The most fear comes from the unknown. So when I don't know what you're telling my child, I'm going to be worried you're telling them something that I don't even want them to know or believe in. And if I know what you're telling them and it doesn't align fully, perhaps with my values, I can still say, I know you learned this in school today, but what mom would like is ABC, right? And then they can have that dialogue. You know, you just have to do your job effectively. And so here's some things I want to talk about in terms of creating a positive learning environment. So, in doing so, building that trust, right? We all know that it's going to be important what our classroom setting or our learning environment looks like. And so we have to, thinking about yesterday's sessions, have open, inclusive, and equitable dialogue. Be attuned to what's happening, be culturally attuned, be sensitive, understand that it might, excuse me, require some training. You have to be respectful of the curriculum design. One of the things I was talking about earlier was red light, green light adaptations. And so with that, that just shows that there are things that you should be doing. You know, if this was found effective, it was found effective in the way in which it was designed. And so you have to be respectful of that, but you also have to know your audience. So as long as you don't veer off from the design of the curriculum and the intent and what the content, you'll be good to go. Again, that parental engagement, if you need, you know, want parents to be involved and have them know what you're teaching, that's going to be important too. And then, of course, I can't reiterate the peer education and the mentoring. And the mentoring could be colleague to colleague in your same area. But what I've learned more than ever since COVID is conferences like this, you start seeing folks dropping stuff in the chat. Like, I don't think I've ever met Liz until maybe this year, Liz. I don't know. Don't call me out if I'm wrong, but I remember that we met primarily online. You have always said some great things, and I think we started following each other. We started communicating, and we saw each other at a conference. My point is, mentoring and collegial support is very important too. You're not alone in this work, as challenging as it might actually be. You're definitely not alone. All right, I'm looking at the time, make sure. Okay, and so the other thing I want to talk about in that learning environment is maintaining our boundaries. So, like Judy said, your experience and your sexuality doesn't have anything to do with your students. And that can be challenging for some of our colleagues, because some people will say that they are absolutely going to share certain things. And I think, y'all, we have to use that within context. We have to be sure when we think about boundaries that sometimes what we say may not be respectful of someone's cultural and religious beliefs, even though we think we're sharing it to be effective. Sometimes what we share may change the perception that the student, and maybe even the parent in this instance, has about us. And while we should be proud of our experiences and know that there could be some learning, we really want to maintain those professional and personal boundaries with that. Also, when we set boundaries up in our spaces, we will also serve as role models and examples for students, right? So we can also promote empathy. We can show a balance of emotional well-being. So we're also modeling what we want them to do in respect for their peers and us as well. And then personal boundaries create a safe space, so that, you know, how sometimes some students might push on that boundary and you set it, that typically is going to mean that that's the space that we're going to have. You're not going to push on my boundaries either. My classmates or the other learners aren't going to push on the boundaries as well. So there's a note on personal boundaries. I love to see in the chat, what your opinions are about personal boundaries. So this would be, do you find it challenging, yes or no, maintaining your boundaries? Anyone find it challenging? All right, so some people say they found it challenging. So I'll answer this question right off, Victoria, because I see it, and since we're talking about it. Can you share some personal professional boundaries that I have in place? Absolutely. In my learning environment, I typically don't offer up my relationship status, even if I'm wearing a ring. I don't talk about my own sexual identity as a whole. Like, there's some things that people can assume based on looking at me, and that's fine, because I think as human beings we make judgments in that way. But I don't get into the details of my own personal sex life or sexual experiences. Even if I use phrases like "some people," "others do this," "you might do that," as a way to even answer questions, because sometimes with the questions that they ask that are boundary pushing, sometimes they're looking to know what your background is and experience, or sometimes it's about affirming or validating something that they did or want to do. And we don't want to do that either. We want them to make informed decisions. I'm sorry, y'all. He's just at, I don't know, in rare form today. But hopefully you can still hear me, and I hope that answered your question. And I don't know who asked it, but that would be an example, right? And also, like, I'm not gonna, now I might share the Leroy story because I teach on a college campus, because I talk to them about how early experiences, who they are in this room today is impacted by who they were 18 years ago. But, it all depends on the audience too. That to me felt like a safe sharing in this space, as well as in my college classroom. If I were teaching younger kids, I definitely wouldn't share that experience with Leroy, because it just wouldn't feel right to me, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, like, when did you lose your, when did you start having sex? And if they ask me about virginity, and I was like, well, what does that actually mean? So I like to push back on that too, because that can open up another conversation. All right, I know we only have a few minutes, and I know we got to get to questions. I'm gonna leave you with this. So here are some strategies of working with parents, and I gotta find my little cheat notes here. Open communication for sure. Try to figure out a way that you can have a platform that parents can share their concerns, ask questions, and any insights. We talked about that. If you're able, involve parents in the curriculum design and the plans that you have, that aligns with the community's values. So that means you got to know your community and create, those parent advisory committees or community advisory committees. Also, think about ways in which you can make sure that the content is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate, and that it's going to be understood and received by the young people that you're teaching. And then always present sex ed as positive. So, like, when I get the kid who's like, oh, and I want to touch base with them and be like, what's challenging about this? What's concerning for you about this? I'm trying to give them a toy. Collaborate in that way, so that both it's great for the young people and you in that environment. If you have angst about teaching, they're going to feel that when it's going to show up in your teaching. And then finally, the resources and support. Places like Amaze, even like I say, I'm also teaching on a college campus, and I use Amaze there as well. Those videos are effective across age ranges. So I know we only have a minute. I want to leave you with, we know that comprehensive sex ed works. We know that parents and educators can work together to make comprehensive sex ed effective. And that's what I would love for you to do. If you have questions, comments, please slide into my DMs or email me. Love to hear from you. Okay, Victoria, I tried to beat the time.
Thank you so much. Ooh, did we get pushed out? Can
No,
you
we
all?
did. I
Okay,
think
great.
you're okay.
Pushed out. All right. So, as always, wonderful. It's always a gem to be around you. So one of the questions is, where is a good place to find teen opinions on their parents talking to them about sexuality? So finding teen opinions, where's a good place to find them?
A lot of times I actually do research. I use research articles that have studied and done some surveys with students. The Pew Institute oftentimes has good information as well. And the YRBS doesn't give the opinion, but it can show you like what some of the behaviors are geographically in your region or nationwide.
Thank you. And I see we only have 30 seconds left in here. So quick question is, do you know of any other sex education conferences that are free or paid that you would recommend?
Well, next week, GCAP, which I know Amaze is gonna, or this conference is gonna advertise, that's free. That's the Georgia Coalition Against Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention. I don't know, I said against, but yeah, that could definitely be a good resource as well. And then online, like sometimes people have free giveaways